Letters from the Mine Workers' Convention by Earl Browder, Indianapolis, Indiana, September 20th, 1921. The convention of the greatest labor union of America has just been called to order. Over 500,000 men who operate one of the basic industries of America are members of this union. The convention is the leading organ of these men. The potential power existing in the gathering of delegates in Tomlinson Hall this morning is immense beyond calculation. More than 500,000 members, united in over 2,000 local unions, are represented by something more than 1,500 delegates. These delegates are supposed to be elected from local unions, to be regularly attending members of these locals, and to be actually working miners, and most of them are. To one acquainted with the actual membership of the United Mine Workers, however, it is plain that there has been some selective principle at work other than the selection by the men of their natural leaders. What makes this body of delegates so different from a local union? A little examination makes it clear. The delegates here look uniformly, quote, American. The great mass of foreign-born miners are not represented here according to their numbers in the local unions. I asked one foreign-born delegate, a Pole, to explain this to me. He said, quote, the Americans will not listen to a foreign worker. It makes no difference if we put up the good ideas. If one speaks with an accent, then one is not heard. So the foreign-born delegates are only from the locals where one race is in a great majority, and they will not try to talk in the convention. They know from experience that they will not be heard. End quote. It is plain that the administration of the United Mine Workers, including the great national convention, is thoroughly, quote, American, and in order to emphasize this point, the hall is draped with a mass of national flags. The red, white, and blue is flung from every side, and the proceedings are also, quote, American. It is impossible to imagine a labor congress in Europe starting out in the smooth, placid Sunday school atmosphere that prevails. Everything seems far removed from the class struggle. Even the rank-and-file delegates, and the vast majority really are such, are in their Sunday best, and on their good behavior. The presiding officers are splendid examples of sleek, well-fed respectability. A superannuated clergyman makes a formal request to the deity to bestow his blessings upon the gathering. But soon we get an intimation that all will not be so placid. Through all the speeches of welcome, opening addresses, and formal felicitations, through all the inevitable folderol of an American labor convention, just beginning its sessions runs a thread of cautious reference to unmentionable things. Gradually, it comes more and more to the foreground. The honorable mayor of the city makes a star-spangled appeal to the patriotism of the convention in his speech of welcome. He mentions incidentally that while there may be a few things wrong in this glorious country, he is not prepared to deny that a few irregularities have occurred in West Virginia, yet under the great and glorious Constitution, etc., etc. Finally, the great and mighty ones of the state and church are gone. Reports are the order of the day. A report on, quote, rules and orders of business, end quote. Suddenly, the suave, soft-voiced, well-groomed, smooth-running progress of events is interrupted. A high, strained-out voice calls out, Mr. Chairman. It is a voice from the mines. In the order of business is report of scale committee. The voice from the floor demands that the scale committee shall be instructed to present its report by the 10th day of the convention. The motion is seconded, and the convention is immediately alive. The first clash has come. One of the floor leaders of the administration attempts to have the motion tabled. He is voted down in a great roar. He then talks against the motion. 3 delegates from the floor speak briefly for the motion. They had experience at the last convention with the scale committee. This time they are determined to know what they are doing before any of them have to go home. They want to know where they stand. They, the delegates, have nothing to conceal. They hope that the Scale Committee has not. The motion is carried by an immense majority, so there is some dynamic force between the exterior of this smoothly running machine. It growls again, and peeps forth once or twice during President Lewis's report. Anything that smacks in the least of defiance to the dark forces against which the miners are struggling gets an immediate response. But as a whole, the report stirs them little. It is not militant. It is so damned polite and utterly bourgeois. But through it all runs the same story. Here, there, everywhere, the miners are in conflict with the machinery of the state. In West Virginia and in Alabama, they are being murdered. In Kansas, they are being jailed. In Washington, they are being betrayed and injunctioned. The great and glorious Constitution, they are told by Lewis, makes the dream of nationalization of the mines an impractical utopia. The immense sums of money raised since the last convention, more than $7 million, has all gone for lawyers' fees, court costs, strike relief, etc., etc. Judgments for tremendous amounts in damages have been assessed against them by the courts. Unemployment has hit the mines very heavily. Hundreds of miners are in jail under indictments for murder. Through it all, and behind all, looms ominously the capitalist government. There are forces in Indianapolis, blindly stirring. One feels them vaguely. Officials speak cautiously so as not to disturb the beast. A splendidly equipped organization machine is running here to keep it within bounds. Plans are gradually being disclosed to prevent its energies from being unleashed, but every official seems to know that it must not be crossed. This convention must be cajoled, coaxed, pleaded with, but not defied nor bullied. The only coercion will be the threat of the power of the government. The power of the government, there it is, threateningly in the background of every act of the convention. Whether anything will develop well, that is another question. Perhaps, but we will not prophesy. It is enough to observe. Planting the guns. Indianapolis, Indiana, September 21st, 1921. Some things emerge from the routine of reports. Lewis and his administration expect to keep this convention from doing anything about the contract that expires next March. They expect to refer everything pertaining to the coming great struggle to a reconvened convention to be called next February. The smooth-spoken president of the Miners' Union has denounced Alexander Howitt and Robert Harlan and opened his fight upon them. Greene has put forth the policy of the officialdom, complete submission to any orders from the government, negotiation as the basis for all national policies on wages and conditions. Very, very carefully, the ground is being prepared for the official acceptance of the wage cuts that will be demanded by the mine operators next spring. Some interesting figures were given out today regarding the strength of the miners' union. The membership is the highest in history, being actually about 550,000, with an average number paying dues for the year of 442,057. Over $3 million was expected in strike aid. The Alabama strike cost $1,770,000 for relief, attorneys, publicity, etc., and the general financial condition of the International is at a low state. Membership is, however, at its highest. New locals are being organized, and the miners seem to be unusually militant. The big events of this convention are yet in the dim unknown. What will this great mass of unorganized, undirected delegates do? No one knows, least of all the eminent gentlemen who now direct the course of events. Yesterday, Lewis told the delegates that the nationalization of the mines is practically an impossibility under our present Constitution. Today, the delegation from District No. 2, under the leadership of John Brophy, distributed pamphlets containing an impassioned demand for, quote, nationalization, but it will be hard to get up a big fight on this. Howitt has not arrived at the convention. One hears his name often. The delegates are patiently listening to reports. They are waiting. Lewis and Howitt, and the government. Indianapolis, Indiana, September 23, 1921. For God's sake, have some respect for your president, pleaded the chairman, Vice President Murray, when 3/4 of the assembly delegates seemed determined to hear no more from Lewis. Lewis was attacking Alexander Howitt and expounding on his own views of what a union should be. Howitt had just left the stand 20 minutes before, receiving the first genuine ovation given any speaker in the convention. It is significant that Murray did not have to plead for the convention to have respect for Howitt. From the time Howitt stepped upon the platform until he left it, the great hall was alive, responding to every word, but giving the closest attention. There was no disorder. Howitt spoke simply in the miners' language. He told about the dispute with the operators which had originated this case, how the operators had refused to treat with the unions, how Lewis had heard the pleas of the operators and had sent 2 of Howard's personal enemies as a committee to investigate, how the committee had ordered Howitt to order the men back to work, how Lewis now brought it to the convention to obtain the endorsement of the delegates from all over the country to his order. Quote, Lewis says you miners are wrong. Go back to work, said Howitt. That sounds very familiar. We have heard that song for years. Operators say it. Governor Allen says it. The industrial court says it. And now comes President Lewis and says it. And he wants you delegates to say it too. Maybe you will. No, no, roared back the convention. Howitt talked the miners' own tongue. He spoke in terms of struggle. Everybody understood him, and most of them loved him for what he said and the way he said it. Howitt has one message. If the workers want anything, they must fight for it. After they get it, they must fight to keep it. And they must keep on fighting so long as there is anything which should be theirs that is withheld from them. It was the first honest-to-God talk that had been heard in this convention, and the delegates flowed out like rosebuds in a warm rain. No, that figure is too peaceful. They rose like lions after slumber. That is better, and is just as literary. Anyway, they roared, literally roared their appreciation of this touch of reality in an unreal convention. The United Mine Workers is a business concern. These words of President Lewis sounded the keynote of his speech. The United Mine Workers is a business concern, and if it would place profitable contracts, it must not injure the feelings of the good capitalists. How it injures their feelings. Therefore, how it is bad business. Quote, the coal operators of West Virginia base their opposition to us on the ground that we do not enforce our contracts. They cite Howitt as an example, and if this convention does not rebuke Howitt and reestablish the sanctity of the contracts and put us back upon a solid basis of business, then the West Virginia operators are right. End quote. I will not guarantee the exactness of these words, but I will swear that such was the plain and clear idea that Lewis conveyed and intended to convey to the convention. No wonder Murray had to plead, for God's sake, have some respect for your president. There were few there who had after that. But Lewis and his kind have other ammunition. The vague menace that has been hanging around the convention for 3 days suddenly became sharp and defined today. Lewis was fighting with his back to the wall. The crowd of delegates, over 1,500 of them, was hostile. There were questions, boos, whistles, hisses. So he had to pull out his real guns. They were government guns. The government has been hanging around in the atmosphere here all the time. Lewis dissipated the vagueness. He made it clear and distinct. Quote, if you do not accept the policy which I have laid down for you, then the United Mine Workers will surely be destroyed. End quote. Then, just as the convention was about to adjourn until tomorrow morning, the great trump card was played. United States Marshals from the Federal Court of Indiana appeared upon the stage and served papers in a suit for a perpetual injunction against the United Mine Workers, charging it with being a criminal conspiracy. "There, what did I tell you?" said Lewis. About an hour before, Mr. Lewis had said, "Howitt charges me with being a friend and henchman of the coal operators. Is it true?" The great crowd of delegates were silent. "It looks that way, Mr. Lewis, it looks that way." "Samuel will pray for us." Indianapolis, Indiana, September 24th, 1921. "I will pray for the United Mine Workers," said Samuel Gompers today, addressing the convention. He had come to the point where it seems that he should propose something in the way of action. This was his offering. Most of his time was taken up by sentences which began, "I remember." Not one of them began, "I propose." A rather absent-minded old gentleman musing over dusty records of past trivialities, with European labor discussing one main question, how to destroy capitalism, with the United States facing the most serious crisis in history, a general assault on labor organization by all the forces of government, press, pulpit, and employers, with unemployment bringing starvation to millions. Still, the keynote of his speech was, "I remember." Along toward the last was an incidental advice not to accept wage reductions, but this was quickly followed by the advice, "Do not overrun. Get our goal by evolution and not by revolution." And the last pronouncement was against the dictatorship of the proletariat. "The miners are a brave lot and hardy. They take punishment well. The majority are still in the hall at 11:30 after more than half an hour of this. Those that are left, a few are asleep. Some read their papers. A few more stroll out every few minutes. An occasional murmur, presumably applause, will undoubtedly be noted by the sharp-eared stenographers. Labor leaders should not leave their jobs for posts in government or business," said Mr. Gompers. "Those whom I recognize are married to their jobs and cannot be divorced." Then he turned to Lewis and said, "My race has not been run yet. The both are married to their jobs, and will only be divorced by the great spiritual revival in the labor movement." Another 40 minutes of harmless chatter, some leaky economic reminiscences, the great John Michael, now in heaven. Give the miners an opportunity to 11:57 a.m. Will the end come soon? That democracy might be safe. Profiteers, applause! Spirit of freedom. We should voice our protests in a minor key, etc., etc. Silence. The great man is gone. William Green, the secretary of the Miners' Union, had read to the delegates the application for injunction filed yesterday by the coal operators, which is directed at the life of the Union. He told the convention that it contained the testimony before the Senate committee of a former president of the United Mine Workers, now a hired agent of the mine owners, which was made part of the evidence against the Union. The former president had stated that he knew and admitted that the UMW was a conspiracy. Upon demand from the floor, he named the former official, who had openly turned traitor, as T.L. Lewis. No, this is not the Lewis now in office, who is for the present ostensibly working in favor of the miners. Yesterday was taken up with a discussion of Lewis's charges against Howitt, and his demands that the convention instruct Howitt to order certain miners back to work. This question was interrupted by the entrance of the great man who had made the morning session today so tranquil. If this convention votes the way it cheers, there is only one decision possible. Howitt is the big man in the convention. He stands for the whole militant spirit of the miners, which is balked at every turn by the businessmen administration. He is the incarnation of that defiance and hate of the oppressive hand of the government which hovers over this convention. Howitt fight threatens Lewis machine. Indianapolis, Indiana, September 26, 1921. The Lewis machine, which is in control of the United Mine Workers, has decided that Alexander Howitt of District 14 must be broken. The decision must have weighty reasons behind it. The dispute itself cannot explain the fight. The machine has deliberately chosen this fight and taken as the basis for it an appeal from the Southwest Coal Operators Association. And today, the administration of the UMWA definitely threw all that it had into the scales against Howitt. They have spoken and said that Howitt must be repudiated, or all the charges against the UMWA made by the coal operators are true. They seem to have staked everything upon winning this fight. The reasons for this, as is said, are unknown to me. That they are grave reasons is indicated by the fact that in spite of the unanimous machinery of the administration against him, Howitt is very strong in this convention. Howitt has all the enthusiasm there is here. How he stands on votes remains to be seen. But the enthusiasm is for Howitt. The good speeches are for Howitt. The whole atmosphere is for Howitt. Let us suppose for a moment that I were to write a novel. One character is ambitious and unscrupulous, and a rather able man in his way, with some political connections on the side. He receives word, through his political connections, that certain assistance which he needs in his ambitions can be secured through ridding his organization of certain influences represented by another. Let us suppose that this plan fits in with his own personal desires. Let us suppose that through mutual friends, these forces are acquainted with each other's plans. A sees too late that B is much stronger than he thought. If he were making his battle alone, he could modify his tactics. But as one section in a wider battlefront, he must go through with it at any cost. The field marshal above has commanded it. Forward, the light brigade. Idle imagination. But one must do something to fill in these great blank spaces, which are unexplained. There are some reasons, grave, weighty reasons, lying behind this little scrap. This petty fight may easily become one of historic importance in the labor movement. Today was the third round. The fighting was not so definite, and the result not so clear in today's battle. Both sides were weaker. Lewis's side, because he had some more members of the executive board speak for him. They weaken anything they speak for. Howitt was weaker because Frank Farrington entered the lists in his cause, and Frank Farrington can hardly strengthen a cause in his convention except by opposing it. A vote is a vote, even in the UMWA. Altogether, today must be said to have strengthened Lewis a little, because his biggest gun, William Green, was shot off today. Mother Jones entered the program for an hour, received an ovation, and delivered her usual fiery talk, but she was outside of this fight. And Lewis gained a little ground, but this convention is a long way from belonging to Lewis or his machine, and it will take a lot of voting to overcome the powerful sentiment for Howitt that boils in Indianapolis. Some more big fights loom up, but none of them will touch this one. The others will most likely be decided by roll call vote, which will be taken on this. If Howitt wins, other progressive measures will be carried out. If Lewis wins, he will run the rest of the convention to suit himself and those who give him orders. The injunction whip cracks. Indianapolis, Indiana, September 28, 1921. Howitt was whipped, yelled the press with delight. Yes, Lewis and his executive board won on the roll call vote. The vote was about 3-2. Howitt carried 6 districts out of 27. Illinois gave him a wonderful vote. It is the backbone of the UMW, the best organized field in the country. The delegates from this district voted more than 95% against Lewis. Lewis drew his strength from the east and south, especially from those fields where fighting is going on. When the smoke cleared away, it was clear that the crack of the injunction whip had carried the day. A few days ago was cheering time, but the roll call came and changed all that. It was interesting to pick out the delegates, who were, one knew from first-hand information in favor of Howitt, and yet who voted for Lewis on the roll call. Good fellows all, but the machine is powerful, and one must be careful when the vote is being written down for all men to see. So not a few cheered for Howitt and voted for Lewis. But today the administration received a setback. The real extent of opposition to the Lewis machine found expression in the vote on the section of the President's report regarding salaries for officials. The Cleveland Convention of 2 years ago authorized an increase in salaries proportionate to the gains achieved for the miners. Instead of following this decision, the Executive Committee passed around salary increases of 60 to 70%. The President's report asked the convention to approve this. It was voted down in a roar of disapproval. There was no chance to crack the government whip over the delegates on this issue, and the administration lost with hardly a semblance of fight. Secretary-Treasurer Green spoke on this all-important question, as he called it, telling how other unions with small membership paid their officers much more than the miners. He was booed off the platform. Lewis pleaded for the salary list. He was heard more quietly, but his argument did not please. He seemed to imply that the miners should bid against the coal operators for the loyalty of the officials. He cited the salaries of mine superintendents as higher than the union officials and asked the convention to pay as well as the coal owners paid their lackeys. This convention is a poor place for that kind of stuff, and the official machine on the first issue, where they could not bring the threats of the government's hard fist, was defeated badly. "Where do you get that gentleman stuff?" yelled a voice when Murray tried to quiet the delegates by calling them gentlemen. This incident was significant. These men want results. They don't know just how to get them, but soft words are at a discount. The Lewis administration has won on most issues, but the victories have been costly. On every occasion they have had to fall back on the government. The injunction whip has cracked regularly on every issue, and when it cracks, the delegates cringe and vote as they are told. But this is a weapon that may wear itself out. The hides of these workhorses may become toughened from too much beating. This official machinery, which gets its strength from the heavy hand of the government, will be in a precarious position when the government openly challenges it again. It has lost its strength with the rank and file, and the victories won in its convention may easily become disasters next spring. Miners vote to help Soviet Russia. Indianapolis, Indiana, September 28, 1921. The proposal that the miners donate a day's pay to help the starving workers in famine-stricken Russia was adopted at today's session of the Convention of the United Mine Workers following the address by William Z. Foster. Foster told the delegates the story of the years of war, civil war, revolution, and attempted counter-revolution which the Workers' Republic had endured. He told of the blockade, which had increased and intensified the results of the fighting upon the industries of Russia. But the workers of Russia had finally defeated their enemies and secured peace. They were allowed for the first time to turn their attention to rebuilding their economic life, said Foster. Quote, "A whole series of new laws had been passed, calculated to stimulate production. The machinery of production was being rehabilitated. All depended upon the harvest this year. If the grain yield was large, the workers would have bread. The machinery would speed up. The revolution would be safe." Everyone was watching the weather reports with breathless interest. Then came the drought. The great grain-producing sections were almost burned to a crisp. Even seed corn for next year's crop is threatened. And the Russian workers are forced to turn to their brothers for help in this crisis. They turn to the United Mine Workers of America. They ask you to join with the labor unions of Europe, and the Machinists' Union, the Amalgamated Garment Workers, the International Ladies' Garment Workers, and the unions of the United States in helping in the relief of this famine. Many organizations are collecting a voluntary donation of 1 day's pay from their membership for this purpose. I think that this convention can do no less to show their international solidarity with the workers of Russia and to help these helpless workers now in the grip of famine." End quote. Upon motion of Delegate John Brophy of Pennsylvania, this convention decided, quote, "that this convention go on record endorsing the appeal of the Russian Red Cross for voluntary aid for the famine-stricken workers of Russia." End quote. This action of the convention will be transmitted to the local unions, which will have charge of the collection of the 1 day's pay donations and such other assistance as may be offered. The convention summed up. Indianapolis, Indiana, October 5th, 1921. The United Mine Workers of America have held their convention. The noise is over. The dust is beginning to settle. What have been the results? And what are the lessons to be learned? The businessman administration retained its power. Lewis, Green and Company completely dominate the national organization. The problems of the coming struggle next spring, when the present contract expires all over the country, have been put off for a convened convention next February. The administration disciplined Howitt of Kansas and Farrington of Illinois with the consent of the convention. After Lewis had won his fight against Howitt, and after Howitt had left the convention to begin his jail sentence in Kansas, the convention turned around and elected Howitt as one of its international delegates. The convention rejected the report of Lewis regarding salary advances made in the past year. This was a distinct defeat for the administration. In the field of international affairs, the miners rejected the proposal to join the Red International of Labor Unions. Less than 300 delegates were for it, and no roll call was secured. Delegates were elected to the International Miners' Conference, to which the British miners, among others, are affiliated, and the report from the last international conference was adopted. There were some brighter moments, however. Relief for Soviet Russia was endorsed, and the request of the convention that miners to donate 1 day's pay for the purpose was adopted without opposition. Resolutions were adopted calling for nationalization of the coal mines, amnesty for political prisoners, closer affiliation with the railroad workers, endorsing the Nonpartisan League of the Dakota Farmers, approving a National Farm Labor Party. Now that the convention is over, what do these facts indicate? What can we learn from a calm study of the miners' convention? It is safe to say that a large majority of the delegates were at least what can be called progressive, that they wanted active union policies, aggressively directed against the coal operators and the government. But most of them had feared the results of such a policy. The threat of the government's strong hand was brought before the convention every day. The United States courts chose the moment when the delegates were deciding between Howitt and Lewis to serve papers in the most dangerous attack yet made by the government. Lewis promised them peace. The government threatened war. The pressure was on the convention in every issue where the administration won. This conflict of progressive desires with fear of the government can be traced throughout the convention. In everything that means immediate action and immediate policy, Lewis wins. Other things which have to do with the more indefinite future, the progressives carry. They can even elect Howitt as international delegate at the close of the convention. The great lesson to be learned from the miners' convention is the necessity for organization of the opposition. The businessman officialdom of the miners had a machine. They were organized. They acted as a unit. Therefore, they won. The opposition had no machine. They were unorganized. They acted loosely and without coordination. Therefore, they lost. The convictions of the delegates were not the important factor. Emotion and sympathy produced lots of cheering and noise, but the votes were controlled by the best organization.